Hey everyone, back with another episode of Sit Down here. I'm your host Ernest. We got my boy Jay Miner, and today we got very special guests. We got 1993 national champ at FSU
Okay.
and the current head coach of my soon-to-be alma mater, Florida A&M football head coach James Colzie. Man, welcome to the show.
Hey man, appreciate you guys having me.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate you hopping on, Coach. I know there's definitely a lot to talk about, but first and foremost, we're gonna start from the beginning, Coach. Correct me if I'm wrong, Coach, because we did a little bit of homework, we did a little bit of research, going back before your coaching days, going back to your young high school days. So correct me if I'm wrong, Coach. I got a couple accolades written down here. So I heard you were the Miami Herald Athlete of the Year, basketball scored 2,000 points, baseball batted over 300. Is this correct, Coach? I was doing this research. I said, man, this must be the wrong coach. Is this
Nah,
correct?
nah, I was you're in South Florida, right? So being in South Florida, you're going against some really, really good athletes, really, really good players. So it was kind of, getting, I started at a very, very young age, and grew up with some really, really good players. And we used to battle in all sports, but I had uncles that played football, basketball, and baseball. They were some went to the NFL, some made it to the minor league, some made it to the ABA. So growing up, my heroes were guys I saw every weekend. On the weekend, as my uncles. So and then my dad coached me. So I had the opportunity and was blessed with the opportunity to play all three sports. And I started at 6 years old. I'm 7, 8 years old playing baseball with Alex Rodriguez. I call him Alex Rodriguez.
Wow.
Y'all call him A-Rod, right? So these are just guys that I had the opportunity to grow up with, and good buddies that are still, they're still good buddies of mine. But yeah, we had
That's crazy.
good high school team, football, basketball, and baseball wise, and I just happened to be one of the players on those teams.
So wait, so A-Rod from South Florida? I did not know that.
Alex he's from Miami. He's
Wow.
born in San Domingo, but when he was, as he got older, he moved to Miami when he was younger, and we've been friends since 8, 9 years old.
That's crazy. I'm surprised he bring you to come work with the Timberwolves or something, man.
Oh, I'm not a baby. Believe it or not, his best sport was basketball. Many people
Wow.
don't know that, but his best sport was basketball, then football, then baseball. But
Wow.
Crazy.
he was actually the guy I beat out for the athlete of the year. Believe it or not.
Whoa.
So it was him, myself. And then the finalists were him, myself, and a guy by the name of Brian Greasy. He played quarterback for Michigan at the
Mhm.
time. So
Mhm.
but it was tough. It was a win, I guess, for me. But he ended up making more money, obviously, than all of us combined. So,
Yeah,
but
by
but yeah,
wide margin.
by a wide margin, absolutely.
And Coach, we all know South Florida being a hotbed for football, but what ultimately led you to the decision to choosing football as your route? Because batting 300, scoring 2,000 in high school nowadays, that's super rare. So what ultimately led you to football in Florida State?
Now you're making me think. I think I have an opportunity when I was in high school. I played all three, and I actually took college visits for all three. So I I went to Florida State for football and baseball. I went to Georgia as far as visits go. Florida State football and baseball. I went to Georgia football and baseball. I took a visit to Stanford for basketball, and then I did
Wow.
I did all three. I took all three to Iowa. But growing up, my family wanted me to pick baseball because that's what they all thought I was the best at, and then basketball they thought was going to be second. But I was only 5'9", so basketball was out for me.
Yeah.
And then obviously, Florida State at that time, two sport athletes, being able to play football and baseball with the blessing of Coach Bowden and Coach Martin, they both were going to allow me to do it. So, I'd rather have given up one sport, right, which was, basketball, but then still having the opportunity to play two. So that was ultimately the route that I ultimately decided to take.
Yeah, man. So, coach, so talk about explain that a little bit more. Like, being a two-sport athlete in college. A lot of people, you hear the two-sport athlete, but don't really know what that looks like, man. Explain to us how that process, going to practice and then, one season, then boom, now you a whole another season for this.
Well, people think you're just playing those sports, right? But Florida State, obviously being a football player slash baseball player, like I had to make sure I took care of my baseball things. But when you're playing football, you still got to go through spring practice. You got to still go through all the winter drills, and so the thing with Coach Bowden is that as long as you're participating in baseball, right, you still had to make sure you were taking care of what you needed to take care of football wise. So it was my days were a lot longer during the spring than they were actually during the fall. But a great time Man, a lot of my friends, man, are all football and baseball teammates that I have. You don't, I took it for granted when I was, during that time, not really understanding that the friendships that I built throughout that time that I have right now are primarily my former football teammates and my former baseball teammates.
So, Coach, I gotta ask you, did you have a dream school growing up? Just because just doing
Um,
homework in history, knowing '80s and the '90s, that's the time in South Florida for the U. So
well,
I'm wondering how
I
they ended
was,
up getting you to Tallahassee, Coach.
I was one of the very few people in South Florida that didn't really like Miami, believe it or not.
Wow.
I was I mean, I went to a private school to 10th grade called Gulliver Prep, but then I graduated from a high school called South Miami Senior High. And
Okay.
when you look at the map, when you get a chance to look at the map, South Miami was literally 6 minutes from the University of Miami. So it was, I just never was a Hurricane fan. My uncle, the one that played in the NFL, he went to Ohio State. So if I was ever going to say that I had a dream school growing up, it would more than likely would have been Ohio State just because of, watching him, getting a chance to watch his film and just watching my dad and my uncle used to talk about how big of a football player he was. He was an All-American. He was a first round draft pick from there. So, those were just, again, just things that, if I was going to say the school that I wanted to go to or was hoping to go to coming out of junior high, it was probably Ohio State. But then I actually went and took a visit there, like an unofficial visit there during the wintertime. And I was like, nah,
Cold.
I ain't doing that. So, but I mean, that was probably my dream school would have been that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, man, I think I made the right decision by picking Florida State to play football and baseball at.
So would you so you go spend your time at Florida State in college?
Yeah.
What now? This could be go for what sports? What sports you have the better moment in? Do you believe like besides the national championship? Obviously,
Well,
that's
I mean, we won national championship. Playing obviously getting a chance to play in that national championship game as a freshman. And then obviously getting up being a 2 year starter there. Had some great moments there. Obviously you're playing defensive back. You're going against some of the best athletes in the country. So you had your wins and your losses at times, but you just love the opportunity to play against the University of Miami for 4 years, right? You love the opportunity to play
yeah,
against the University of Florida for 4 years, right? Obviously winning 4 straight years. Conference, we won the conference 4 straight years, and probably had some more accolades as far as football goes. But I do remember being on that baseball team when we got a chance to go to the World Series. We had a good baseball team, and that year we thought we were going to probably end up winning the College World Series. We did not, but again, when you go back that time frame, and you're playing football, or you're playing baseball, there was some highs and lows, right? But
yeah,
I'm fortunate that I guess I was a decent teammate to those guys that they felt to still maintain some of the relationships that we have now. This is 30 years ago.
yeah.
That got a chance to play, and I was being at some of these guys' weddings, and just being able to still reach out and not have to just when reaching out and talk to those guys. Because we're better. We were good teammates, and now we're friends, right? Which is at the end of the day, which is most important to me.
And Coach, I know you mentioned over about 30 years ago,
Yeah.
especially now, today's time is definitely different now with NIL and then with a three-sport star like you. I know schools would have definitely been throwing bags at you. Do you feel like NIL would have impacted your thought process in decision making, or were there
Some
certain
people,
things that you were looking for in a school?
some people say we were getting NIL before NIL was going
Under
on
the
during that
table, huh?
time. But I mean, obviously the landscape of college football's changed. And primarily because of stuff that happened 20 or 30 years ago, right? They felt that you needed to, to pay back the players for what they were bringing into the university. So, you may, I think NIL it was a great idea, and it's still a great idea. I just, I wish there was some minor tweaks. I mean, right now you're getting guys that are going to multiple schools, right? And I don't think that's what NIL was intended for, or the transfer portal was intended for. So, but to the players, right? They're taking full advantage of it. I'm happy, I'm happy that they're doing that and they're getting opportunity to make money right now because that was not something that we were able to do, many years ago, right? So, but you just wish they would just tweak it a little bit because again, I don't think the portal slash NIL deal is for guys to be attending 3 or 4 universities and at that time, you have guys right now that are doing that.
Yeah.
100%, man. So you finished up your career at FSU, you talked 2 year starter, winning the national championship, man. Then you got started your coaching career kind of early, man. So what made you want to get into coaching?
Well, I mean, as a player, right, and just playing from the age of 6 to 23, 24. You bounce around in the minor leagues. You bounce around to a couple NFL teams, and but minus my father, right, the people that had the biggest impact on my life were my coaches. You got Coach Andrews and Coach Bowden, guys that I blood, sweat, and tears with, and they helped mold me to be the player and sometimes the man that I needed to be, right? So I wanted to become similar to that, have an impact on other players' lives, right? So, FIU was starting their program in 1999. So I had that year, 2 years bouncing around to different organizations. Well, it was like, well, now it's time to find a job, right? So wanted to be a coach, wanted to be a college coach, was blessed with the opportunity because my uncle Neil, who played in the NFL, was at an event with the Miami Dolphins in '99, and he ended up being in a foursome with Coach Don Strock at the time. And Coach Don Strock was looking for a young defensive back coach, and my uncle heard what he was saying, and my uncle put my name in the hat. Went in, interviewed, and got the opportunity. So very, very again blessed to be around some really good people and my first college job, which was at 25 years old, which as a full-time coach, that's not normal for a lot of people, right? But that's, again, just being in the right rooms or my uncle being in the right room and hearing the right conversation, I was given that chance.
Hey, man, it's not what you know, coach, it's who
And
you
who
know.
for sure. I mean, hey, they were playing golf, man. It was a golf foursome. I mean, hey, my uncle Neil could have been in a completely different foursome and not even heard the conversation, right? But
Exactly.
that's just the Lord working for you, even though you're not in the room.
That's all it is, man.
And coach, just with you being around a lot of legendary coaches such as Coach Bowden, in terms of just in terms of how you mold your own coaching style, do you take bits and pieces from coaches that you had previously, or do you just try your best to try to be yourself and whatever comes with that?
Well, I think it's important to emulate, not imitate, right? So, and I think that those are things, Coach Bowden had his own style, but that was just, again, him having the experiences that he had throughout his coaching tenure, right? I have I have a former player on my staff right now. My defensive back coach is Coach Andre Pope, and he played for me as a defensive back at West Georgia. So that was during the 2009, 2012 season. And, there's no way for me to be the same coach I was in 2009, 2012, and than how I am now, right? You have to, you gotta expand as a coach. You gotta broaden your horizon as a coach. Back then you could coach the kids a certain way, where now each kid's different, right? You got a young man that might have come to you out of high school, right? And then you have another young man that might have been to two different universities, right? So I think for me, it's just important that you learn the guys, learn who you're coaching. Everybody's different, and that's the biggest thing that I've had to learn, right? Like, not you can't coach everybody the same, even
Mhm.
though you're supposed to treat them the same. Well, you got to know these guys. You got to get these guys to trust you before they could play for you. So, I just those are things I just learned throughout my tenure. I remember myself from the 1999 season and the 2000 season and 2001, and comparing myself now. I'm a completely different coach, primarily because I'm a completely different person.
Wow.
I'm a father now, I'm a husband now, where then I was 25, 26, I was living, I
You
was in
less
a different life,
responsibilities. Yeah.
and it's not necessarily the decisions that are made, but just, I'm a 26-year-old coach compared to now, as an assistant coach to now being a 49 to 50-year-old head coach, right? So, you pay your dues, you learn your lessons, and you hopefully whatever the lessons are, right, wrong, or different, you just want to make sure you don't make the same mistakes.
Yes, sir.
So you talking about paying your dues, man. Yeah, I say we're doing a lot of research here, man. I see all the several stops you've been on.
Yeah.
You mentioned some of the West Georgia,
Yeah.
your FIU. That there was a head coach somewhere. I forget the name right now. He was a head
I
coach
was St. Mary's, and this is when I was in Canada. I was in Canada for
Yeah.
6 years.
in
Yeah,
Canada. So you
yeah,
did a lot of stops, man.
yeah,
So
yeah.
what would you say? What's the hardest part? Like being an up and coming head coach and having to move and stuff like that and
Well,
adjust.
you sometimes you move because of maybe getting let go or fired from other spots, right? I've been around some good head coaches, some really really good players. So a lot of my movement has been just because of the success that we might have had at that previous stop, right? You talk to a coach or you talk to a staff or you're talking to a head coach that wants to interview you. It's easy to interview when they're talking about the good things that you did, right? So every stop that I've had, even at Florida State, right? Like, he, get a chance to go back home, right? But it was primarily because of the job that I had done at FIU. And then Florida State, you go to Valdosta State. Well, we won a national championship. I was at Valdosta State for 7 months. Well, you win a national championship, then you go to West Georgia as a coordinator, right? So, each stop that, for the most part has been, well, he's had success. He's coaching All-American, he's coaching All-Conference player. So, it's an easy transition to become a part of that staff compared to being let go, right? Where maybe it's a different conversation with that head coach or whoever that stakeholder may be of that institution.
Yeah, because you're not as sought after if you losing, man.
Basically, yes,
It's
who's
real.
coaching that? Who's coaching that guy? That guy's a great football player as opposed to, man, who's coaching this dude? This guy
Exactly.
can't do anything. Like, who's coaching that guy? So, again, you're allowed to walk into certain doors when you've had success. So that's a credit to the players I've had, to the head coaches that finally, that finalized making sure these guys came in, and again, just people. I've had a lot of people pray for me, and have prayed for me and have blessed me to be in the situation / opportunity that I'm in right now.
Yes, sir. And then just in terms of your current role, obviously being a head coach, but you've had previous coordinator roles, position coaches. Was being a head coach, was that ultimately your end goal once you got into coaching? Because I know a lot of
Well,
coaches, they
I think you always
specifically
want to run
just
your
want to
program,
become a
right?
head coach.
You always want to run your program. I think that even my 6 years in Canada as a head coach, right? That was my first time being in that seat. There is some of that pressure, right? And but each institution that you go to, you want to make it better than when you left it, right? When you got there, right? So I just think that right now in the position that I'm in, right, blessed again. Coach Simmons does an amazing job. We won a national championship, but as his assistant, I wanted to make sure that I did everything imaginable for him to have success. Like that, I wanted my goal was, as the assistant coach, was I wanted to make sure that Coach Simmons was the coach of the year. So I wanted to take that upon myself, that, hey, whatever my job is to ensure that Coach Simmons is the head coach, the SWAC head coach of the year. So, not my sisters that I have right now, I know they're doing a great job to ensure that for myself, because that's the mindset that we have, right? Because if we have success as a staff and as a football team, that can only, again, broaden the horizons of my
Open up
assistants, of
everything
our
for everybody. Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, but at the end of the day, you always want to run your own show. I mean,
Mhm.
not saying that I can't drop down and be an assistant, because, I've been a good assistant too. So, I've been a good head coach. I was a good head coach in Canada. Thought I did a decent job last year, but looking to be much, much better this upcoming year.
Yes,
For
sir.
sure, man. Yeah. So we talk about that national championship team, man. Tallahassee was on
Yeah.
fire that year,
Yeah,
boy.
absolutely, man.
Ooh, fire.
It was a good time. It was a good time to be an A50.
Yeah, it sure was, man. It sure was. So, we won the national championship that year. Coach Willie Simmons, got the opportunity to go to Duke. And then, we had to find a new head coach.
Right,
That took a while, they do what they do here. They do what they do. That took
yeah,
a overly long time.
right.
But so, you had Willie, you looked up to Willie Simmons, you was talking about how, you wanted to help make him better and things of that nature. So what would you say was the biggest thing Willie said, like he taught you? What was the biggest thing Willie Simmons taught you, like to be a coach?
Well, I think that, and again, I want to make sure I clear it up. I wasn't helping Willie Simmons. Willie Simmons didn't need no help. I
Oh no,
just wanted to
100%.
make sure that, I did everything imaginable for him, right? Because he gave me set guidelines. He wanted me strict rules of what he wanted for me. So I wanted to make sure my job, whatever my job description was, I wanted to make sure I upheld that for him, like as for him, to make sure that he needed from me. So I think the biggest thing with him was because, even though. And even in 2022, right? We're 9-2, and even though we're hoping that Jackson State's going to lose, because we have a chance to now play for the conference championship, and then moving to 2023, actually beating Jackson State earlier, right? And then just making sure our team just continued with the momentum of trying to win a national championship. I just thought he did a great job of just having his, being where his feet was, right? Because as we're winning and as we're, playing these important games, right? The biggest thing on his mind was making sure that FAMU was ready to play. Don't, you heard all the rumors. He was going to go here or he's going to go there. He's going to have this opportunity. But when he walked into that staff room every morning, he was all about Florida A&M. And again, that's tough to do when everyone's trying to talk about what you're doing and where you
Yeah.
may be going.
Hmm.
Where the biggest thing you got to make sure you take care of is where you presently are. So I thought he did a great job of being where his feet was. And then obviously, he was on the, I was on the defensive side, he was on the offensive side. He let us defensively coach. He let us coach. Like he didn't really mess with us because he put all of his attention into what he wanted to do offensively. But don't get me wrong, he was well versed in what we did, right? And then if there was something wrong on Saturday with the defense, he definitely let us know. So, I just think that, that's the thing I learned from him. Obviously just, there's more to being a head coach than just showing up on Saturday at Florida A&M because there's so many things you got to do. You're dealing with alumni. You got alumni on a Wednesday. You're dealing with convocation on a Friday. Then you got to be the head coach on Saturday. Then you got to come right back on Sunday to make sure that the team has their breakfast ready to go. So, you're wearing a lot of hats. You're doing a lot of things, and but just being able to make sure you manage your time and all those things.
Yes, sir. Like you mentioned, there's so many things that a head coach has to take on outside of the X and O's. So with you finally taking over and being like that head guy, was there anything that caught you by surprise, or was there like a shocking moment that you realized, just in terms of everything that you have to do with FAMU?
Well, just as much, I catch up on a lot of my football at night. Because there's so many things you got to do throughout the day. You know what I mean? So that, Coach Simmons will come in the morning, like I do come in the morning, and then you just got your head coaching duties, right? You could start your football stuff if you want at 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. You're not gonna be able to get it done because there's so many things you got to do to keep them going, just keeping the team going, right? So, at night is when you got to catch up on the football stuff, right? On night you got to watch. That's when you can watch practice. You know what I mean? Or that's when you can make your adjustments for games or game planning. So, that's the biggest thing. I think that, the amount of non-football you do during the day, because the football aspect is minor, right? Because you got to still be able to run the football team throughout the day, because that's what the players are depending on.
Yeah, 100%.
So, Coach, you hinted at this earlier, talking about the landscape of college football, how it's changed so much with the NIL and everything. So, as a head coach, explain what do you believe is the hardest part of being a head coach trying to navigate the NIL era?
Well, we're at being at the FCS level, right? We obviously aren't necessarily at the top of the totem pole
Hmm.
in regards to funds, right? So, during our 2023 year, right, we lost some really, really good players to programs that, quote unquote, may have had a little bit more money than we may have had, right? So, I mean, I've adopted it as, that's the landscape that we're living in. So, you got to make sure you take care of your guys while they're here. You got to make sure that you're whether it's your top tier players or your mid level players or hell even your scout team players. You want to make sure that they all improve, but you got to make sure every single day that they're leaving this program happy, right? Because there are other universities that are trying to reach out. We know that. What can you do about it? Nothing, right? But you just want to make sure that the coaches take that personal investment with each player that they have in their room. And me being the head coach, I got to make sure I take that personal investment, make that personal investment every player that I have on my roster to make sure that they're happy every single day to be a football player for Florida A&M.
And I know, just touching on that, with FAMU being FCS level and HBCUs being notorious for not having enough resources, or the resources like the other PWIs or bigger name schools. So do you feel like with the HBCU levels and schools in the SWAC, do you feel like that's just a problem that like those schools would just have to be kind of just handcuffed in terms until there's other solutions in the
Well,
future?
I don't see it as a problem. I just see it as what we have, right? When you come on a visit here to Florida A&M, and you come visit us and watch practice, and you come and we give you the tours, and then you come here on an official visit. I'm never going to talk about what we don't have.
Mm,
Everything about us is when you come into our building, you're going to see the MEAC SWAC Challenge Trophy, right? That we played in front of 55,000 people for. You're going to see the Florida Classic Trophy that we played in front of 60,000 people. You're going to see the Celebration Bowl Championship that we won in front of, playing in Atlanta, right? So, what we're going to show all of the things that we can do football wise for you. And then when you walk our beautiful campus, right, we're going to show you all the positive of our campus, right? I can't worry about what we don't have. I'm gonna make sure I talk about all the things that we can provide, right? So, HBCU, FCS, that I'm the head football coach at the number one HBCU in the country. So what we have, I would put that up against anybody in the country. Right?
yes,
I'll
sir.
put that up against anybody in the country. And then at the end of the day, when you leave us, You're gonna know all the positives about Florida A&M, and then you'll make your decision based off of what you know about us in regards to the other schools that you may be having the opportunity to choose.
Yep. Because just from my piece alone, if your only decision making is NIL, hey, that's the type of player I wouldn't want to recruit
I
anyway.
wouldn't want
But
that kind. You know what I mean? I
exactly.
want a guy. You know, right? Again, I get it. You know, you have friends, right? People have friends that may be at institutions, right? I mean, I know we got players that are here at Florida A&M. They got friends that may be at Florida State, and they may have friends that are at Bethune, right? I mean, everybody talks about what people may get or what they don't get, right? But you know, if you're coming to Florida A&M, right, you're looking for the opportunity to play for the number one HBCU. You're gonna play TV games in front of great crowds, right? You know, this year we got 12 games. 8 of our games are in the state of Florida. Our home schedule is probably one of the tops in the country, and you're gonna play in front of the one of the best, not one of the best home environment in the country, right? So, you know,
Yeah,
for me, it's all about the positive, right? It's all about the pluses, all about the positives.
Sure.
Where you know what, you may go to another institution that may be Division 1, but I can tell you right now that I mean maybe FBS, but you're not going to play in the same type of environment, right? You're not going to play on
yeah.
national television, right? You're not gonna play on in a huge classic like we do the Florida Classic that we play at the end of the year. So you know, again, those are the things that I'm gonna make sure that you know about as a recruit compared to maybe what we don't have or compare myself to another institution. I'm not there. Right.
Yes,
I
sir.
know what we have here. I love everything that we do here. I know that if you want to go play in the NFL, we got 3 to 4 years of showing guys that have come from here to go play in the NFL. So that opportunity is there, right? So anything that you may want to do as a football player, you can do at Florida A&M. And I make sure that when you leave us, you definitely know that.
For sure, man. You know, yes,
I said it better.
me being a student here, you definitely don't hear that before I let go anywhere else in the stadium.
Nah,
You
man.
ain't hear
And
that.
this is you're gonna hear this before I let go, and you're gonna hear that encore. That's gonna get played. And then they're gonna play the King George. They're gonna play King George. If you want to leave, go ahead and leave. So hey, you know, and everybody's singing it. Home crowd, the
Everybody.
home team, the away team. So
Oh yeah.
you know, and then the student section, obviously, man, the student section is the best in the nation.
For sure, man. They got the best band. It's a lot of great positives about the school,
Absolutely,
man.
absolutely.
Now I got a question for you though, coach. Now I go to your field, been to the field house a few times. Now you talk about you see the recruits come see them trophies. Those are real trophies y'all got out there?
I mean, those are the ones that last year I carried the MEAC challenge off the field. That's what I was carrying. You know, the Florida
Hey,
Classic
you sure
trophy
you
that
sure
I
that ain't no
had.
replica? You sure that
No,
ain't no replica?
did you try to pick it up?
Yeah, I did. I did.
How heavy was it?
Yeah, it was a little
No,
heavy.
those are it. Those are it.
That's what's
Those are
up,
it.
man.
Now,
That's what's
coach,
up.
now I gotta ask you, I'm gonna put you in the hot seat real quick.
What?
So from your playing days and your coaching days, two separate answers. Who was the best player that you played against? And then who's the best player that you had the game plan and coach against?
The best player that I played against was Randy Moss. And now so people when I was at Florida State, people vaguely remember that Randy Moss went to Florida State for a year and a half
Mm-hmm.
before he got in trouble, right? And then went to Marshall. So, I mean, by far, now we didn't play against him. We had to practice against him because his first year, he couldn't play. We redshirted him, so then he was on the scout team. You know what I mean? Man, it was Randy Moss. So our scout team wide receivers were Randy Moss, Peter Warwick,
Ooh,
Ron Dugans, and Lavernius Coles. And so, that's who we used to have to go against every day. Where, I mean, Hall of Famer, 2 first-round draft picks, and then a third-round draft pick. So as a corner, we had no choice but to get better every day. Either we were
Yeah.
gonna get better every day, or we were
we're
gonna
gonna
get
get
smoked
embarrassed.
every day, right?
Yeah.
Game plan. That's a great question. Wow. So I'm gonna age myself a little bit, but I remember when I was a GA at Florida State. I was a GA at Florida. You know what? I'm gonna give you two if that's okay. If that's okay, as far as
Yep.
game. When I was a GA at Florida State, right? Florida had Tim Tebow, right? But
Mm.
Tim Tebow wasn't the one. The one that we were having a hard time game planning for was Percy Harvin, because Florida used to line Percy Harvin up everywhere,
Yeah.
right? They used to line him up everywhere. So, when he was at receiver, it was like, well, we're gonna line him up receiver. We're gonna give that corner some help, or tell the safety to go over the top. But when they lined him up at running back, that was the biggest issue because then we didn't know where he was going, whether he was going to run it,
Mhm.
and then was the linebacker going to be covering him? Like it caused a problem. It just caused a problem because and then obviously Tebow was doing what he was doing, but
Mhm.
we never wanted Percy Harvin to be lined up at running back because then that meant he was going to be one on one with the linebacker. So that was something that we
And
had to kind of
you know how that was gonna go.
so that was really really tough for us to handle. And and then they messed around and put him at running back one time and then he ran it and the sucker almost hit his head on the goalpost. So that was really tough. I just remember Coach Andrews and Coach Steele. We were just trying to figure out how we were gonna do it. He was tough. Wow. Hmm. Man. So in '06, get as a GA, we had to get ready for Chris Henry. He was a wide receiver playing for
Mhm.
West Virginia at the time.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And he was always backside, and he was kind of one of the first receivers that, even though he had size, he also could fly. You know what I mean? So normally at Florida State, when you put that receiver backside, you could just say, well, we'll just line up our corner
Yeah.
backside with him, right? But with him, you couldn't necessarily do that because he was such a good player. So I just remember just kind of figuring out how we were gonna cover him, during the bowl game, and then but like you know what? But like to be honest, Percy Harvin, man. Percy Harvin was that guy, and they were also pretty good, right? They were a good football team, so it wasn't just him.
Mhm.
You had to account for some other people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the guy that we were worried about the most was Percy Harvin.
Coach, just want to touch back on when you were saying about Randy Moss. So as a corner, just from trying to pick your brain, how do you go about guarding him? Because
You know,
if
you
you
know.
if you play off, you can't give him that free release to just be running full speed out. If you pressing him, that's a mismatch. Like what
Well,
do you
that
do?
for us, well, the way we cover, we had to press him, right? Because if he got full stride on you, man, it was
Over
done.
with.
You know what I mean? So we pressed a lot during that time. So you wanted to put your hands, you had to put your hands on Randy, like you had to put your hands on him just to try to slow him down, and then like you could be in great coverage. He had such great hands, man. I mean, hey, we used to call him the demoter. We used to call him the demoter, right? So like you'd be on first team to start practice, and then Randy Moss would have beat you twice. Now your ass is on second team because he done demoted you. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
damn.
Like that's what I mean. He working with the ones, and then now Coach Andrews, Coach Andrews was the kind of coach he didn't want anybody catching the ball on you. So then
Mm-mm.
Randy Moss, you'd be in great coverage, and he'd catch it on your head. And now, well, you don't want to play. Letting this scout team receiver beat you, hey coach. Like this guy's a Hall of Famer, man. Y'all redshirted him because on purpose. Like this guy should be starting for us our regular team, right? But it was great, but not really. Because if you mess around and you were on first team on Thursday and he embarrassed you on Thursday, then you weren't gonna start on Saturday. You might have played, but you weren't gonna get your name called as the starter. So,
Man,
but no lie, we didn't call him Randy. We either called him 14 points or we called him the demoter because that was what's gonna happen. You were gonna get your butt demoted. He was gonna demote you.
that's crazy.
So we being one on one, we like, okay, Randy's going third, I'm gonna go fourth. I
Oh,
ain't, I
he
ain't
counting in line. He counting in line. Hey,
Okay, I'd rather go against Peter Ward than Randy Moss. Like that, it was foolishness like that. Yeah,
and that's still crazy to say because Peter Warwick is one of the greatest college receivers ever.
should have
So
won the
that's
Heisman.
crazy.
Should have won the Heisman, right? But had a little issue during the middle of the year. But I mean, Peter Ward was the third. Was either third or fourth pick of the job. I can't remember. Maybe fifth. But I mean,
That's wild.
Randy Moss was that dude. He was
Yeah.
that dude.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he been terrorizing people for decades, huh?
I mean, corners were happy he retired. I promise
Uh,
So yeah, coach, let's talk about a little bit about the current upcoming season and the players you got right now in the
you.
building, man. So who would you say you're most excited to see them take that next step in development this season?
We got 35 seniors, man. So I think when people talk about our team, you first and foremost, you got to talk about our offensive line. Our offensive line is very, very good. And even though we're still trying to add some pieces, right? But you got basically all conference, two All-Americans that are returning, right? And on top of that, you got Thad Franklin, who will probably be an preseason all conference running back.
Hmm.
Bo Somerset, who had a great year. So, we know our team is going to be about running the football on offense and stopping the run on defense. So, as long as we're able to run the ball successfully, I like our chances offensively because now you got to stack the box on us, right? And now you have the ability to get the ball to our skill guys who are also very, very good.
Man.
So we got to be able to establish a run on the offensive side, and then being able to get the ball to our athletes. I think having a conversation with our offensive staff this morning, like they're still trying to figure out who that quarterback's going to be that's going to step up and take over the huddle.
Hmm.
Our players have got to be able to believe in our quarterback, right? And and
Yeah.
and, and until that guy takes that step and takes control of the huddle, we're going to still try to work through that. But we have the benefit of having a big time running back, a couple other big time running backs to go along with that, a great offensive line, and so that's offensively, that's probably where we're going to hang our hat early in the year. Defensively, as far as many seniors that we have returning, our defense is probably have more seniors on that side than you see on offense, right? Where you got James Ash, guy who's preseason, he'll be preseason off, first team all conference, and I love our linebacker room. We brought two linebackers back that didn't play last year because they got hurt, so they'll be with us this year. Then our back end, you got Chase Lloyd, you got TJ Huggins, returning guys that are returning starters. So, I mean, we got some really good players out. We're banged up that aren't necessarily participating in the spring, but they'll be ready to go by the fall. But we're gonna really, really lean on those 35 seniors, right, to lead us through. I think we've had a great spring. Not just counting our practices, but our lifts, our fourth quarter drills, our OTAs, all that's led up to our spring practice. We just finished spring practice 8. I'm happy where we are. We just got to make sure on these last 6 or 7 practices, we just got to make sure we finish strong.
And then with FAMU, with you guys experiencing success in the past and just going into the next season, do you feel like as a coach, obviously you want to win every game, but in terms of success and how you determine success, how would you feel that next season will have to go in order for it to be successful? Is it more of a championship or bust type of thing, or what defines success for this group?
Well, I mean, I think just being at Florida A&M and obviously being a part of the staff, winning the championship in 23, right? It was a hell of a feeling. You know what I mean? And now obviously, you go to 24, you lose the game against Jackson State, and now, that feeling was now gone, right? We were sitting there trying to depend or wait for other people to possibly lose, right? Where, I think for us, the ultimate goal is to win the SWAC championship. That's what we're playing for. Like we're just not playing just to go through the season, and then whatever our record is, whatever our record is. I mean, the expectation here, not just from our fans and the alumni, but just for this football team and our staff, is to win the SWAC championship, host the SWAC championship game, win the SWAC championship, and ultimately not just play in the celebration bowl, but also win. Like those are the expectations. That is the standard that has been set here at Florida A&M. So trying to go back to that or revert back to something that may have happened in the past, that's not really an option.
Love that.
Sure, man. So my last few questions for I have for you is, so knowing what you know now about how last season went, you went 7-5. Obviously, it's not how we wanted it to go. Looking into next season, looking to build and improve on that. What, as you're saying, look at yourself in the mirror. What do you think was the biggest thing that you need to improve on for next season?
Well, I as a head coach last year, right? I probably did less coaching than I had done at any time in my career. I'm being the head football coach at St. Mary's in Canada is hella different than what it is being the head football coach here at Florida A&M. So, obviously my first year I had to learn a lot, right? I had to learn how to be a head coach at this level, right? I mean, it's different. Trust me, guys. The head coach at St. Mary's was very, very different than being the head coach here at Florida A&M. So, I had to prioritize being the head coach before I could prioritize being the defensive back coach, right? But ultimately, at the end of the day, I think that when you get to that Saturday, right, making sure you touch every part of the program to ensure that the product is what you want it to be on the field. You know what I'm saying? So you just because you think they know doesn't mean they know. Like you got to tell them what you want. You can't beat around the bush about what you want. You got to tell them what you want. So ultimately that might have, just that led to some of the change that we had with my staff, right? I think,
Yeah.
I made it very, very clear with the staff members that I brought in, right? I knew them. I've been around them. They played for me. I recruited them. right? So, bringing a staff in that I feel I can truly trust to do the things that I'm asking them to do, right? But on the player side, we just had to learn from our mistakes. I think that, you looked at our football team, minus the Miami game, we were in every single game, and then ultimately had the chance to win it, right? Where there might have been some mistakes, some discipline mistakes, mistakes involving details that affected us winning that football game. Where some of the games that we won, we made good decisions.
Mm-hmm.
In some of the games that we lost, we made bad decisions. So as a group, right, just raising our expectations, raising our standards, and not making the same mistakes last year, not making those same mistakes this year. So we can learn from those mistakes. I mean, we got some very, very important games we got to play. Obviously, people want to look ahead to Jackson State and all the other things like that, but we have to take care of our first game. We can't worry about stuff that's in November or in October. We got to take care of July when training camp starts, leading up to that first game of the year in August. And being able to handle and deal with the expectations that are going to be put on this team. They're coming. That's going to be there. We'll be preseason this. We'll be this, and this. Well, they're putting you like that because they're doing it for two reasons. Because that's the expectation they have of you. But the second reason is they're also trying to set you up.
Yeah, you're right
Right?
there.
They're also trying to say, hey, we're gonna gas them up a little bit to
Mm-hmm.
see how they are. Well, hey, the ceiling is high, yes, but you got to get to that ceiling. You can't get to the ceiling the first game of the year. It's got to be built upon.
For sure.
And Coach, my last question.
Hmm?
I just think about these hypotheticals and fantasies. So I know this probably will never happen, but in the future, how would you feel about if all the Florida, if all the Florida schools played against each other, like BAM, Florida State, Miami, Florida, USF, FAU, FIU, if all those schools in the future somehow got a way to get like a real state championship, do
Well,
you
I
think that will
mean,
ever be possible?
well, you'd have to probably dip some money up into some of the FCS programs that are in that part. But obviously for us, that'll help us in major in recruiting, right? What I mean? Just having the opportunity to say we're going to be able to play these teams yearly, right? And again, like people fail to realize the amount of people that leave the state of Florida to go to school. Like you have so many athletes that leave the state of Florida. Now, don't get me wrong, we got our guys that stay in state and they go to the Floridas, the Florida States, the FAMU's, but the amount of guys that leave to go to other institutions where, hey man, listen, the recruiting tool is you're going to play every single state, you're going to play every single game. You're gonna play every single school in the state of Florida. Well, are you really? Well, then just stay here, right? As opposed to maybe going to some of the MAC schools, right? You stay here and be able to have your family come see you every weekend, some form of fashion, right? So it'd be great to have. I don't know if the Floridas and the Florida States would agree to that. You know what I mean? But I think it'd be a great idea for a program like ourselves, right? Because obviously going to Florida State or them coming to us financially, right? What does that do? That obviously that helps tremendously, right? We went to USF a couple years, right? Played Miami last year, and this year we're playing FAU, right? Those are all money games, right? That are helping to come to us to help our program financially. So, now you're playing those games 2 or 3 times a year, but you start slowly but surely getting some of those kids that might have gone to Florida, might have gone to Florida State. Obviously it makes our product a hell of a lot better as well.
I know I'm gonna jump in, but I'm glad you mentioned the MAC because just in Florida, I went to high school in Tampa and stuff like that. So same with Jordan. So there's a strong pipeline to the MAC just in that area alone. So I definitely see what you're talking about.
Well, because they didn't necessarily get recruited by the Power Fours, right?
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And so, whatever reason, they might have been from Tampa. They had to get out of Tampa for whatever reason, right? So, they are not going to go to FAM because it's not quote unquote FBS Division One. So I'm going to go to another school in the MAC. Well, you look at some of the schools in the MAC, they're playing in front of 10,000 people.
Yeah.
When you look at our game, they're playing in front of 50 to 55. So
Jumping.
what
Yeah.
school is truly Division One, right? On game day.
Hmm.
Right? Where again, when people watch MAC football, man, that is great product.
For sure.
Great, man. They play really, really good football up there. But then you realize this kid is this wide receiver who's 5'9", 180 pounds that can absolutely fly is from Pahokee. Well, hold on now. How the hell that Pahokee kid get up to Kent State? Well,
Yeah.
how did this DB from Belle Glade, how did he get to Bowling Green? Well,
Exactly.
it was FBS compared to the schools that might have only been FCS, right? So, I know a lot of good players in South Florida that went to MAC schools and did well. Did really, really well. Really, really well. Played
Stick
good
out like a
ball.
sore thumb, though.
Yeah. Played good ball.
Yes, sir. And coach, my last question before I kick you off to earn, I'm gonna need you to put you on the spot real quick, coach.
I'm
I'm gonna need
good.
you to put you on the spot and gonna
I'm
have
good.
you
You
have
you
you
said
think.
that you've said that 3 times and you put me on the spot all 3 times. But go ahead. What's
Yes,
up?
sir. I need your Mount Rushmore of South Florida athletes.
Wow. How many? That's four?
That's four.
It doesn't
You can't go wrong either way, but I need your opinion
doesn't
of guys
matter.
you've seen with your eyes.
Doesn't matter what the sport.
No, sir.
Okay, do they have to be from Florida? Or can they professional
Yeah, they
athletes
gotta
from
be from
Florida?
Florida. They gotta be from Florida.
Okay.
Guys who you've seen firsthand.
All right. Wow. I think you gotta put Alex Rodriguez on there for sure.
Mhm.
For baseball, Frank Gore for
Oh,
Ooh.
sure. For football, um, people really don't remember. And again, I'm gonna age myself a little bit, but Adonis Haslam's got to be on there for basketball.
UD.
You got to have him on there just because of what he did for Miami High when he was in high school, and obviously the presence that he had for them. I mean, people don't realize that he was still getting paid at Miami Heat and wasn't even playing just because of the presence that he had
Oh yeah.
as a local Floridian playing for the Miami Heat. I got to give you one more, don't I? Ah, man. Nah, hey, man. You know what? People gonna get mad at me, but this is just because of the love I have for this guy, and he would be in the Hall of Fame right now. But Sean Taylor, man, that guy right there, man. He and I
It's
and
my
I, and,
favorite
I, and,
player.
I, and I'm putting him there because of the what could have been. You know what I'm saying? And I'm missing out on a lot of guys, and I apologize. But those first three names came up to mind. But then, for whatever reason, Sean Taylor was my fourth guy. I mean, I just because of what could have been, because I know what could have been, he probably would have been my first guy that would have come to mind. So, and all four of those guys I've met, had relationship with, had conversation with, communicated with, and those are just guys that come to mind. And I trust me when I say to you, I'm missing out on a lot of damn players, but.
Yeah.
I'm apologizing now, but those are the four. Those are the first four that came to mind to me.
It's all
Sean
good.
Taylor, that's my favorite player all time. So when you say you went to Gulliver before you transferred, that's why I was like, Sean Taylor right
Well,
there.
Sean
Yep.
Taylor's dad spoke to my dad about how Gulliver was.
Wow.
Wow.
So, and obviously, Gulliver, if familiar with Gulliver, Gulliver's a private school. There's not a lot of us that attend the school.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it was, it's a little bit of a culture shock once you attend there, but, you know, obviously academically, you were great. You were going to play against some really, really quality opponents. And you were going to be able to get your name out there as an athlete. So, I've been watching Sean Taylor play high school football, man. That guy, he was a dominating
Man.
player. People didn't know he was going to play DB. Everybody thought he was going to play running back because how big he was. But
Yes.
very very few people knew he was going to be a safety because of what he did in high school wise. But everyone, for the recruiting, we ultimately knew he was going to be a safety.
Can't
Wow.
argue that list.
So Frank Gore, did you get to play against Frank Gore, or you
Well, I remember Frank Gore. My uncle coached Frank Gore when he was young, and then I had my little cousin, little Neil, who actually came to play for FAM.
Mhm.
They grew up together. So you just guy Frank Gore had the rushing record there. And I'm forgetting. I put two guys on there and completely forgot about my Florida State guys. But yeah, I mean those are just I just Frank Gore had the rushing record, which at that time in Miami was supposedly never going to be broken.
Mhm.
But for him to do what he did at Coral Gables High School, that was a pretty big deal. Obviously, Alex was #1 draft. He probably the best ever baseball player to ever come out of the state of Florida. And then just obviously what Adonis Haslam did, because Adonis Haslam was just, he's a big time player coming out of high school. I
Mhm.
think
Three
he won
state
three
champions.
state championships, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
Then went to Florida. I want to say, I don't know if they won a national championship when he was at Florida, but I think he was, just did what he did while he was at Florida. And this, people fail to realize what he did for the community while he was playing for the Miami Heat. He was big time, big time for what he did and what he still does.
Definitely bigger than basketball with UD.
Absolutely,
Sure.
absolutely.
So yeah, man, that's gonna be the end of this episode, man. Big shout out, man, to Coach Colzie for
Yes,
coming
sir.
out here, spending time with us. You know how busy the spring season gets, man. Much love.